Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I got a great guest today. He's going to join me. He's going to talk about his amazing channel. We got Nate from Nate Talks to You. Huge channel, amazing content. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on so we don't waste any time. Nate, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. Anytime. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what got you started in YouTube, man.
Yeah, my name is Nate. I began my YouTube channel, Nate Talks to You, I think at some point in September in 2010. And originally, I had a channel before that called Crazy Nathan Today 22, which I used just to make a variety of content, be it like sketch comedies and let's plays and whatnot. But eventually I realized that at that point in time I didn't have the proper, software and proper camera to make high quality, acting stuff. So I figured that, just like talking to a camera would be more appropriate for me at that time. So Nate Talks to You is like my way of just, voicing my opinion on various topics out there. And what began as like a small little hobby eventually grew into what I have now, which is a channel that's got hundreds of thousands of people that are subscribed to it, getting thousands of views per video. So yeah, it's been
Yes,
a long ride.
you definitely have a great number of subscribers because obviously in my opinion, you have great content and the opinion of a lot of other people, obviously. So you're doing a great job with it. You cover a lot of topics. You cover a lot of you cover political. You cover social issues. You cover religious issues. What is it? What is it? What is it that motivates you to make a video? Is it you see something that you think is ridiculous, or you see something that kind of just invokes some kind of emotion in you, or what is it that kind of motivates you to make a video?
Um, there's a variety of factors that motivate me to make a video. I suppose the primary one would just be the desire to share my opinion on a certain topic. I know that even before I knew YouTube existed, I was always a very opinionated person growing up. I'd like to discuss, various things happening in the world. So I figured that, just making a commentary-esque channel would be very fitting for what I like to do in general. Um, so of course that's always an interest of mine. Like if I see something interesting happening regarding, internet drama or something happening in the political realm that interests me, I'll just, latch onto that and I'll just begin preparing a lot of research for it, and then a video will come out in the future then.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I first came across your channel when someone actually shared something of yours on Facebook. I went back and tried to find the video. I don't know if it's still there. It was about basically how to employ critical thinking when approaching a subject.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you know the video I'm talking about, but
I
it's
believe you're talking about one. It's either Qualia Soup or Theremin Trees. Yeah, they made this animated video detailing how to think critically about topics, and
right.
I remember discovering their channel around I think 2010, 2011, and they've been an inspiration for me in how I employ critical thinking into my content.
Oh, absolutely. It was amazing. It really was. Honestly, it was right around the time when I first started looking into the course. This channel is dedicated to mainly the religious aspect of things and looking at religion and thinking about the arguments. And it was right around that time that it's amazing that video was shared with me, and it was really amazing because a lot of the things we go through life and we kind of take in this input from around us, and a lot of times we don't really take the time to assess how we're letting these things enter our brains, so to speak.
Hmm.
We don't really take the time to check our filter. So it was a really good video, and it was really one of those things that kind of made me start thinking about, wait a minute, how am I looking at subjects when I see them? Because obviously we get bombarded with things on social media and other forms of news and things like that.
Yeah.
How do you think that with all the stuff coming in, what do you think is the biggest problem we have today with actually deciphering what is true from what is bullshit, basically?
I suppose the biggest issue right now is poor education in this country. I think that public schooling should focus a lot more of their time and effort onto teaching critical thinking in the classroom, because a lot of kids, they're just like given an assignment. They're told, hey, learn this math equation, write a paper on this topic, but they're not really taught that the proper skills in formatting a rational argument. I found. At least that was my experience when I went to school. I didn't feel like there's a lot of emphasis on like trying to make sure a source that you're citing from for a research paper was accurate and whatnot. So I see people all the time on social media, sharing an article, and it'll have like, a very bombastic headline. But if you actually read the article, you find that, the headline is just clickbait, but the actual substance doesn't match what they're saying. Or, they read it, they just like take the information for granted, and they don't try to find, other sources to corroborate the information in there. So that's something I try to employ when I'm making a video. I try to make sure that I can find other sources that are all saying the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. That the clickbait headline has become one of the biggest problems I see. I definitely see that, because I do, and if I see an article, I'm so worried about looking dumb, because I think that I do have, like, I absolutely have that ability. I'm one of the most, I don't say self-critical people, I guess. So I'm always worried about, like, before I make a comment, I'm like, oh man, I got to make sure that I don't end up looking stupid here. And that's more of a pride thing with myself, I guess. It's I don't like to speak off the cuff a lot of times. Mm-hmm. So when I click on the article, and I'm looking for the big reveal that the headline promised. I'm looking for the big story, and it's rarely ever there. It's rarely ever as incendiary or as provocative as I was promised by the headline. Mm-hmm. So I do think that those headlines are more geared towards emotion than they are to facts.
Are you familiar with a thing called the CRAP? I know it's a goofy name. You ever heard of the CRAP evaluation guide?
No.
It's CRAAP. So, like, these are the 5 main things that you should be focusing on when it comes to an article or a YouTube video. So the first one, C, would be currency. That's like, when that article was published. Is it something from, like just last week? Is it from 10 years ago? How modern is this information? Because for all we know, in the next decade from when that article was published, information could have changed. We could have learned a lot more, so that information could now be irrelevant. The next one would be relevance. Does it relate to, the actual argument being put forward in the headline and everything? The other one would be authority, like who's the author, who's the publisher of this information? Is it coming from a tabloid? Is it coming from like a professional academic journal? And if it's coming from a tabloid, for example, like, is that something you really want to, like, put your trust into? And next thing is accuracy. Is there evidence being provided? Are there, like, sources being presented within this article, or is it just just them claiming things without backing any of it up? And I think one of the most important ones in there, which is, the last one, P, is purpose. That would be, what is the intention of this article? Because a lot of people, they'll just read an article, I find, and they'll just take it for granted without thinking, what is the bias this website might have? What is their motivation? If it's a conservative outlet, obviously they're going to be presenting information in a way that furthers their own goal. And the same thing, of course, goes for a more left-wing website. They want to present their side in a certain way to make their side look good. So always be wary of the biases of the sources that you're getting your information from.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great thing. I wish I'd heard of that years ago, because that would have made a lot of things a lot easier. Because you're right. Those that last one especially, it's amazing to me, because a lot of times what we'll see a particular website or a particular group, they will find that it's not hard to find an authority, an expert that will gladly give you some reason to believe what you believe, and then please cite me in your paper and do whatever you want. It's no problem. Mm-hmm. I often wonder how, because people tend to say, well, look at this expert says this, they're expert in this field. Mm-hmm. It must be true. Yeah, that's fine, but I need to go with what the consensus says. Mm-hmm. Because when that person's able to convince the consensus, that's when it becomes believable.
That's the thing, is that you can always, like, find a small handful of scientists here and there who agree with anything, even from, flat Earth to vaccines causing autism, for example. But these people you often find are just, like, outliers. They don't represent the general scientific consensus, like you said. And when you actually look into what they're publishing, they're not going through all the scientific rigor that the consensus group is going through.
I've had some experience with people who are obviously much more well educated than me, but who seem to be using that. Basically, they seem to have abandoned the scientific pursuit in favor of economic pursuit, in favor of the quick dollar. And
Any
they've kind
examples
of,
in particular?
well, they've kind of, there was locally, there was, this deals with the religion issue, this thing that I deal with, but the topic of evolution always comes up when you're dealing with religion, and Christianity is the one I deal with mostly because I live in the United States and it's the most prevalent. But locally, there was a church that was having a 3-day series about why evolution's false, and they were having, and I saw this advertisement. I was like, oh my goodness, this is right near me. I couldn't go to all 3 days. I could only go to one day, but I was like, I have to go to this. So I started looking into it. I wanted to know who were the presenters, what was going on. I wanted to look into them. The person they had coming to speak, it was one guy. He had a PhD, but it was in like aeronautics.
Aeronautics, that's like airplanes, right?
Right. It was. He worked for NASA at one point. I mean, it was. I looked into it. I was like, I just right off the bat, I'm going, why? What is what? I just emailed I messaged the pastor of the church, and I said, why would you have someone who has no background in evolution speak about evolution?
I've noticed that too, actually. I've noticed that there are people, if people really hold firmly to a certain idea, they'll just pick anybody. Like, if they have any kind of degree whatsoever, even if it's not relevant at all to what they're talking about, they'll just put them up there because, hey, they're still scientists technically, so therefore let's use them. I'm not sure how much you know about the 9/11 truth movement out there. They believe that, the Twin Towers were, all planned by the government to collapse. They have on one website this like massive list of experts who agree that 9/11 was an inside job. But on this list of like people that signed this document, they're referencing people like dentists. So it's like, what does a dentist have to do with structural engineering of a building and how that collapses? It's really goofy.
So basically, they're just looking for people with letters by their name and putting them on a list.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it was amazing. I did get to go to the that like I said, I went to the talk that he gave, and it was as bad as I could have possibly imagined. I don't think I could have imagined it being worse, because it was here's what evolution leads to: eugenics and Hitler and everything else. And I got to ask a couple questions, and it was fun because you saw him. He was in a church. He did not expect dissenting opinions whatsoever. Mm-hmm. He did not expect any questions that called anything he said into question. At the end of it, he got a couple more questions from the audience. It wasn't a big event, but he made a beeline straight for where I was. I was sitting all the way in the back, and he made a beeline straight for me. And he was like, I almost like he felt compelled to kind of not look like he was running away or something. And I was like, it came right up to me, and I was like, oh. He's like, oh, yeah, I'd like to talk to you some more. I'm like, oh, absolutely. I have a lot more questions for you. And before long, we had people gathered around us, and it was like deer in headlights. And the more I talked to him, the more I got the feeling of like, I get the feeling that you saw an easy way to make some money here.
It's a possibility.
I did. It's like, I got the feeling, because after the questions I was asking, you could tell he hadn't really thought about. And he's like, you made this PowerPoint presentation or whatever you made, and it was kind of that. So I get the feeling sometimes that where there's a dollar to be made, you're going to find people that are willing to do whatever they can to make it.
It's also, speaking of which, that's brings up a couple of things in my mind, actually. It's that before making a video on a certain topic, I do try to look into it as thoroughly as possible. I try to see as many perspectives on the issue as I can, be they biased or not. Even if a source is biased, they may have, some little factoid that you're not familiar with. So still try to like hear every argument out. Therefore, you have the most knowledge on it as you possibly can. Because, if you want to win an argument, the best way to win an argument is to make sure that you're right about it. So... just make sure that you're not just hearing one side of the story, and that way, you just know everything there is to know about a subject.
Absolutely, great advice. So obviously my channel is geared towards atheism and Christian debate and things like that. Do you identify as atheist or agnostic, or how do you identify yourself?
I've been identifying as an atheist since probably around like 15 or 16 years old. Before then, I was raised as a Methodist Christian. But I think even before officially becoming atheist, I always had some agnostic tendencies to myself. I always found a lot of things about the religion confusing. A lot of things I found like didn't make sense, but as a kid, you kind of like push those questions to the back of your mind, just kind of take it for granted. Your parents believe this, your school believes this. Just go along with it. They have to be right.
Right. I think a lot of that does when we're raised as kids. It comes from these are the people I trust.
Hmm.
They wouldn't steer me wrong. They wouldn't lie to me.
Hmm.
And I don't think. And when you're a child, you think it's either a lie or it's the truth. You don't understand that people could just be wrong. And so yeah, I was raised Catholic. I ended up actually switching over to like a non-denominational church and in my teen years and becoming actually a youth minister at one point. But it definitely is. I don't recall ever having those kind of questions when I was a child. I kind of wish I had at this point. Now it might have happened sooner. But yeah, so what do you think are the biggest? What do you think is the best thing that atheists and agnostics can do to help? I guess help further the slowing down of the effects religion is having.
So basically, like help more and more people become deconverted, help them, turn away from religion.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess it really depends on the kind of avenue you're going with. As far as like me and other atheist YouTubers out there, I'd say there are various methods when it comes to that. You can be a firebrand, and some people are very receptive to like the amazing atheist style of content. Some people prefer a more formal civil format like Cosmic Skeptic. Just go with whatever one is more appealing to you, and if you're good at it, then hopefully you can bring people over and make them see your side of things. However, I think that when it comes to talking one-on-one with a person, for example, in your family, like the YouTuber firebrand method is not the way to go, because in that situation, people tend to get very defensive when you're talking to them like face to face, and they're going to lock up. I forget where this analogy came from, but you ever heard of the rider and the elephants analogy?
No, I haven't.
I forget who came up with this right now, but basically, he argued that like your brain is essentially made up of two parts. There's the rider and there's the elephant, and the rider is the rational part of your brain, and the elephant is the emotional part of your brain. And the elephant is obviously a lot stronger than the rider is,
Yeah.
so you have to appeal to that emotional side of the elephant in order to get it moving, because no matter what that rider tells the elephant to do, no matter how rational that part of your brain is, unless you get that emotional side to be receptive first, they're not going to go in either direction. So when it comes to example talking to, let's say maybe your mother, your father, your brother or sister, you want to make sure that you have like a trusting, like civil connection with them beforehand, because if you come at them with hostility, they're just going to shut down.
Right. I think that applies to pretty much everyone. No one wants to be yelled at, or no one wants to be told that they're an idiot or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think once if you can demonstrate the flaw in their argument, you tend to be able to. People tend to be less likely to be able to ignore that, because if you can actually show them, maybe through like I like the Socratic method. I love asking questions. When someone presents, I want to hear their argument, and I want to ask questions. I want to say, well, would this also work? But by this method, would this also work? Well, if we can find some scenarios where this doesn't work, how can we know this is a reliable method?
I was about to mention that actually. I think the Socratic method is probably the best way to engage with people one-on-one, because it makes them do a lot of the legwork on their own. You're asking them a question, and those questions make them have to think for themselves. How does this all work out? It's not you telling them what to think; it's them thinking through it on their own. And I remember there are a couple of channels out there who do a thing called street epistemology.
All
And
right.
you just watch these videos, and like you see the Christian or whatever theist debating the atheist, and you just like see like them beginning to like that faith they had in God before begin to wither away, because like, oh my God, this really doesn't make sense.
Well, a lot of the times they're getting questions they've actually never heard before.
Hmm.
They've never been presented with them because of where they live, their family, their community are all like-minded individuals. They think like them. They believe like they do. Getting presented with questions like that, one of the things that was amazing, because one of the things that I can look back and say that actually started my deconversion, so to speak, happened years before I ever identified as an atheist. It was people in another person in my church. We were talking about, I believe it was Scientology. I'd never heard of it at the time, and someone was saying, "Oh, listen to this. This is, this is what these people believe. This is insane. Can you believe that people actually believe things like this?" I remember thinking, "Wait a minute, we believe in some stuff too." we kind of tend to say that we think that this guy did miracles, and we think a lot of things that other people might think are crazy also, and that kind of got me going. It's like, why do we get to say one thing is weird but ours isn't? And it stuck in my head for a long time. It did. It was, and I can still look back on it and say that was one of the times when I can look back and say that was something that someone said that stuck with me for a long time, and not the way they intended.
Mm-hmm.
But it was. And then through the course of the next few years, I ended up seeing videos like yours, and I came across, of course, the YouTube algorithm worked its magic, and I came across more atheist videos and critical thinking videos, things like that. And here I am today. But yeah, so when we get into the idea of debate and how to deconvert people, we seem to see a lot of the whole religion and politics is the two things you should never talk about with people because it's considered it's considered rude by some. It's considered like you're encroaching on the very fabric of who they are.
Yeah.
And as I said, I watched a lot of your videos, and even with the political ones, it's like we need to the theme seems to be we need to get away from this attachment we have to ideas. Do you think that's fair?
I think that is fair, but as far as actually accomplishing that, I think it's very difficult. I mean, there are ideas that I had, let's say, 5-10 years ago, and I think it's like just part of human nature to, when you hold a belief, you don't just think of it as like, oh, there's this belief, floating in the ether around me. It's like, no, this is a part of who I am. It's part of your identity now. So when you begin to have someone challenge that idea, they take it personally very often. I think most people feel like a sense of discomfort when an idea that they believe is like a fundamental truth begins to get questioned. People just, I think, naturally just want to shut that down immediately because it's like, no, you're destroying a part of me in a way.
Yeah, I get the feel that some people think that it's almost like you're questioning my right to exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I kind of understand it, and I kind of don't, because I'm able to say that, yeah, if you question something I believe in, I get that. Oh, wait a minute, I'm going to push back on a little bit because it feels like what I believe is right. But then there are some that get so emotional about it, and they're so attached to it that they almost feel like you're questioning who they are as a person, and you're attacking their very existence.
That's the thing about it. That's why, I do think the Socratic Method is probably the safest bet that people have in actually changing people's minds, because I think it's the least attack-esque method of doing it. It's just more questioning and them doing like self-attacking, you might say.
Oh, right. When I talk to people, I want them to tell me what they believe first. I want to know exactly what it is, because if I start saying, "Oh, well, this doesn't work," "Oh, no, you didn't hear this part of it." Like, I want you to tell me exactly what it is. I want you to define it for me. I want you to, and then I'm gonna ask you some questions about it. And after that, you'll usually get "Oh, well, this is different. This is not the same thing," or "This is I didn't tell you about this part yet."
Mm-hmm.
So, and it becomes a lot of post hoc rationalization and moving the goalpost to try to make it fit back into where they wanted it to be, because now you've moved that idea into the realm of something that might not work. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think it's important to keep in mind, even when you are having these conversations with people, that people usually don't just like flip their opinion over the course of one conversation. I mean, like in an ideal world where people weren't super emotional, if we were like totally rational human beings, we could do that in a heartbeat. But people, with these emotional attachments they have to their ideas, it can take time. So I think in many cases, it could just take, multiple discussions before they fully break away. Or if people have time to themselves to engage in some introspection, you could find that after having that debate with them, give them, a week down the road, to think about it more on their own, and they could just break away at that point.
Oh, absolutely. And I love it. I love the idea of too that we need to get more used to just basically pushing pause on a conversation, saying, I have no idea about that. That's something I haven't considered yet. You could be right. Let me go look into this. Let me go look into it, get back to you. And this idea of winning a conversation is something we have to get rid of soon. Because if you're in a conversation trying to win something, you're basically just you're trying to do something for yourself. You're not trying to do anything for that person. So that's one of the things. That's why I love the dialogues. That's why I love the back and forth. And sometimes you're going to run into people that they're not interested in having a conversation. They're wanting to tell you what they think, and they're wanting to tell you that you're wrong, and that's the end of it. And they're not willing to hear anything you have to say, and they're not wanting to answer any questions. Or if you do ask questions, they're wanting to try to avoid answering it so that they can stay on their script. But generally, when you talk to people about these things, and people who haven't considered the topic a lot, or maybe they've heard it and from their family members or something like that, you generally can, if you ask them honest questions and you're straightforward with them, and like you said, you do have to appeal to emotion, let them know that you are there to actually understand. You're not trying to win a conversation. You're trying to understand what they believe. But yeah, that's general. I do tend to agree that you do have to soften and massage the person a little bit for anything to work.
That's one way of putting it. Yeah, give them a nice massage. Just ease them out first.
Right.
But like what you mentioned before about learning about new issues. That's why I always try to provide like a source for everything I claim in my videos. I mean, I don't have any PhD. I don't have any special medical degree. So why should people trust my word? They really shouldn't. But I can provide sources to experts who can back up the claims I'm making. So, throughout my video, I'm not sure, you might notice like I'll have in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, I'll have like a URL, like provide a link to where I got my information from. And I hope that people who, do question what I'm saying, as they rightfully should, can go to those links and be like, oh, well, what he said was true. Here's the evidence for it. And that way, instead of just having to like take my word for it, there's that backing for it.
Yeah, I just pulled the channel up. I wanted everybody just to get to see, what all you have. You have a lot of great content, a lot of different topics.
Yeah, I've covered a diverse range of stuff over the course of my time online, but yeah, awesome. You can notice there's a bit of an evolution.
Oh, absolutely.
The course of time. A lot of my older content from, let's say, 2013, 2012, and so was more surrounding internet drama. But I found that in recent times, I've kind of grown out of that. I feel like, I mean, if that's your cup of tea, more power to you. But I feel like I want to cover, more important social issues now. So more of my recent content, you see, for example, the Ben Shapiro one or the Muslim logic fail ones. I want to cover ideas that are having a serious impact on society. And I want to move more in that direction in the future. I want to start covering ideas that I see which are popular nowadays, which I think are severely flawed, and I want to be challenging them and hopefully move people towards a more rational, well-grounded idea.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I'm so glad I found your channel. As you can see, I've watched a lot of them. I don't have time to watch every one of them. I wish I did. I'm going to get to them, but I generally pick the ones that I like the Dennis Prager one. Obviously, I loved that one. I was like, I couldn't stand him either. I was like, I have to see this one.
I would not mind covering more Dennis Prager stuff in the future because that channel is massive right now. And I know that they have a lot of money. They got plenty of corporate funding to advertise on YouTube. And I know my brothers mentioned, for example, there are people that he works with, that are around, the age of 20 and stuff, that they see these videos and they begin to adopt a lot of really bad political views because of it. And I think only part of that changed because, these ideas are severely flawed. And yeah, I just hope people begin to think more about what they're adopting.
Dennis Prager there's no shortage of bad things Dennis Prager can say. There's no shortage of bad ideas. It's and you see these. It's funny because I think people see these videos, they see the quality of them really because they look good. They look professional.
Mm-hmm.
And and somewhere in the back of our brains, I think we're tricked into thinking that someone with the ability to do this surely has done their research. Someone with someone with the resources like this, someone that has the knowledge to do this, wouldn't spend their time making a video that someone can easily just debunk in 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Because there'd be no point in doing that. Surely, no one would waste their time doing that. So I think people go into these videos, and when they look clean and polished and things like that, you go into this with this sense of, oh, I can trust this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I will give PragerU credit for one thing. I mean, they definitely do have the whole aesthetic of professionalism down to a T. I mean, their ideas are again incredibly broken, but they do speak in a way in their videos, and they do have the animations, and it makes it easier for a person who's unfamiliar with these ideas to just become very receptive to them.
Yeah, I know especially if I had been at the time, I mean, if at the time I had been a right wing Christian believer, seeing videos like that, I would think, oh wow, this is it's clean, it's polished, it's very well done, and immediately my guard would be down.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I'm alone in the world about feeling that way. I think there are many people that would fall victim to that as well. But yeah, so I had a thought I was going with, I completely lost it. But yeah, so no, I think we get this idea of these are things I can trust, and these are things that I can't. We tend to think with our eyes first sometimes, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, is that something that you feel like you've come across too, when you're doing videos? Is that something you think about, or is that something when you're
Think with our eyes, you mean like more like being more of a visual learner? Do you mean?
well, we tend to trust things more when we see things we like.
Oh yeah, I mean, I definitely believe that confirmation bias is a severe issue. But part of that is I always try to make my material appealing to as many audiences as possible. I find that instead of just saying something in a video, I also want to provide visuals to back up what I'm saying. Be a screenshot from an article that I'm talking about, and I just try to make it as comprehensive as possible. I don't try to make things more complex than they have to be, and I try to avoid being too harsh on people. I try to avoid too much name calling. I mean, I might be a bit snarky here and there, but there's a limit to it, because if you do too much, then people who are already against you are just going to shut off instantly.
Right. Like I said, I've seen you take on specific people. I know you did the Anita Sarkeesian videos, and you've done the Chanty Binks videos. You take on certain people, but you tend to let them dig their own graves, so to speak. When you're making the videos, you tend to just kind of present what they say instead of, this is how I feel about them.
Well, yeah, when it came to Nina Sarkeesian, I take it you mean like the 8 fails video about her. I noticed that a lot of people on YouTube who also made videos about her were just always calling her horrendous names. And I was like, I mean, I get it, yeah, you're an entertainer, but I mean, do you really think that people who are unfamiliar with her will look at this kind of thing and like be receptive to this message? I think that a lot of people would be put off by that kind of presentation. So I tried to come off as being a lot more neutral in the language that I used. And I think that because of that, the video was successful, and a lot of people were brought over to my side because of that.
Absolutely. I watched. I'd never heard of her, honestly. When I watched it, I was like, oh, well, if you're doing a video about it, there's obviously a reason you're doing a video. I wanted to watch it. I looked into it, and I was like, wow, this. And like I said, it wasn't a one-sided critique. It was, these are the things she says. These are the things she's done. Make your own judgment. Here's what I think about it, but I'm not saying, you definitely avoided this person's they're a terrible person and blah blah blah. It was definitely, here's how I would respond to this.
Mm-hmm.
You tend to take it of, if she was in the room with me, this is what I would say.
Personally, I think that if you're going to say that somebody is a terrible person, before you say that, provide the evidence for it, and then just follow up with that comment. But if you begin the video just by saying that, it already does make you look biased.
Right. And there's plenty of that on the internet already.
Mhm.
So you could be the 1 in a million people calling someone a terrible person, or you can be the 1 out of 10 people actually breaking down their arguments and showing why they're wrong.
Yeah.
So, see, what was I was going to go to the next one. So we have, obviously, your videos deal with a lot of like people who have a problem with science denial,
Hmm.
and we kind of already covered it. You'd like to see more critical thinking taught in schools and everything. I totally agree with that. Do you think that the culture of science denial, and we see more of it now, do you think that's always been prevalent, or do you think we just see it more now, or do you think it's actually growing?
That's really hard to say. I think there are certain elements of science denial which are dissipating over time, but there are other elements of it that are becoming more prominent. I think in terms of religiosity, when it comes to ideas like creationism, I think those are withering away. I know that, for example, Pew Research has shown that over the course of the past, 20 or 10 years at the very least, we're seeing an increase in people that don't identify with any religion. Like I believe they're called the NONES, nuns,
The nuns.
by them. And that includes, atheists or agnostics and whatnot. And I think that is a massive positive for the future of this country. I think that religiosity has played a major role in people being unreceptive to certain scientific ideas. So I think that the atheists are definitely winning on that field right now. With that being said, there are other things in this country which I'm seeing gain more prominence. For example, anti-vaxxers. Um, I've kind of been um, dancing around with the idea of like exactly how to handle anti-vaxxers, because for a long time I've been a big supporter of the idea of the whole free marketplace of ideas. This idea that um, if we let all these people come together and just debate back and forth, the right ideas will ultimately win. And I mean, like in a perfect world, I think that would be true. But I think that if we look at history, that's simply not how things always play out. A prime example, I know it's kind of, just generic at this point, but I think a prime example of this would be in Germany. Adolf Hitler was allowed to engage in the free marketplace of ideas, and he obviously had horrendous ideas, but, according to the whole theory of the free marketplace, he should have lost, right? Well, he didn't. He became the dictator of the entire country, and a lot of people died because of that. So, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of there's a philosopher named, I believe, Karl Popper,
I've heard the
and
name.
I'll try to find it right now. It's the paradox of tolerance, I believe, is the term, where you should be intolerant of intolerance. If there are ideas that are so horrendous, and we understand through evidence of the past what these ideas will lead to, then at that point it's like there's really no point anymore in engaging with that. Is there really any point in us engaging with the Adolf Hitlers of the modern times, which we'd call the alt right? Because these
But
ideas we already know from the past what'll happen. So is it better to actually platform these people, or is it better to just say, what, these are bad ideas, get the fuck out of here?
all right, absolutely. I think we've actually seen in the last few years with the state of the presidency we're in right now, that expecting the cream to rise is not going to work,
Mm-hmm.
because it's obviously we do not have the best situation in the White House. We do not have I don't think there's anyone convinced that Donald Trump is the best possible person we have in the White House.
And that's another example right there. I know that when Trump was running for office, I believe it was CNN that would just run so much coverage of him, and they wouldn't always push back on what he was saying. They would just like let him talk. And I thought, like, this guy is so absurd. People will just laugh at him. It'd be great. No, a lot of people were receptive to his ideas, despite how idiotic they were. So if you're going to platform people, I think it is important that you always push back against them. Don't just like give them an open mic. Make sure that along with that microphone, you are always challenging them, and make sure that you're also competent at challenging them. I mean, there are some people who have good intentions. They want to challenge an idea, but they simply don't have the rhetorical skills to effectively debunk what they're saying. And because of that inability to debunk what they're saying, we see, for example, these Ben Shapiro destroys videos out there, where these people are right and Ben is wrong, but they're just incompetent at the debate format.
Oh, absolutely. I see those, and I do watch them. I do watch the Ben Shapiro. I want to know what the arguments are, obviously, but also want to see what tactics they use to basically convince people they're right.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can generally find, whether the argument's good or bad, you can generally find some sense of theater or some sense of charisma that
Mm-hmm.
is also playing a huge factor in what's convincing people.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think that Ben Shapiro is good at presenting bad ideas in a way that, despite being wrong, they feel right.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll watch these videos, and I usually, and it never surprises me because I always expect it. The person he's talking to has worked hard on it. They wanted to ask this question, and they've been, I'm gonna get him with this question,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't realize this is what Ben does.
Yeah, I mean, he has a law degree from Harvard.
Right.
He has media training. It's like, no matter how right you are about an issue. I mean, like, if you're socially awkward, you're gonna get demolished up there.
Right. Ben is so good at basically hiding and that's what makes good debaters too, is if you can hide the flaws in your argument well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much about, and that's the with live debate and with things like Ben Shapiro does. It isn't so much about what your ideas are; it's how can you hide the flaws.
And that's why I like doing what I do in the pre-written format that I do it, because I don't have to worry about being caught on the spot. I can just press the pause button, do a bit of research, find out, oh, actually you're wrong here, and then therefore like that evidence is always up there. I can never be caught off guard if I can always have time to do fact checking beforehand.
That is I do like I do engage in Facebook debates and things back and forth, things like that, and at some point I do become just tired. I'm like, look, I can't keep typing to you all day long. I have a family, I have a life to lead, and so I do like definitely when you're dealing with the science and things like that, I tend to not even bother with those debates because I don't have the knowledge about it. I also don't even really know where to go to get it. I mean, if I spent enough time, I probably could, find some things. But at the end of the day, I don't even have the ability to comprehend what's in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the necessary expertise to even read this paper and fully understand it. So I can show you, I can point someone in this direction, but I can't tell you this is why, this is what happens. I can't take them step by step through it.
I wanted to say one thing, going back to the whole science denial issue again, and anti-vaxxers is a prominent example of that. And again, regarding the whole paradox of tolerance and the consequences of certain ideas being platformed. When it comes to anti-vaxxers on social media, I've become more and more convinced that the best way of dealing with them is less with directly engaging with them in the comment section, but more just preventing their voice from being as loud on social media, because we know what the consequences are to these people getting a stronger and stronger voice, and that is that there are people out there who are sadly misinformed, and because of being misinformed, they become convinced by the flawed anti-vaxxer arguments, and that leads to just more and more kids out there not getting vaccines. More kids out there are now getting sick because they don't have the proper immunization. So I want to lead to a world where more people are healthy, less people are dying. So I think the best thing we can do is simply prevent these voices from being as loud as they are on social media.
Oh, absolutely.
And that could mean shadow banning them. That could just be, regulating, how many of them can be on the platform at one point in time, whatever we can to just make sure they're not harming the world. That's
definitely a good debate to have. I've heard it, people talk about it before, is who should we platform? Who should we allow, basically? I mean, you say allow, meaning that I own the platform. And, as far as from the perspective of people who own the platform and are running it, what responsibility do they have to the people on that platform?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of cheesy, but, it's like in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So I think that if you want to lead to a safer, happier world, it's your responsibility as a powerful platform owner to make sure that bad ideas don't become too strong.
And I think if we look through history, we can see a progression of basically shunning the people who have the bad ideas and promoting the ones and letting the ones who have the good ideas have a bigger voice. You know, we saw an end to slavery because of that. We saw an end to many different things because we eventually said, look, you know, enough of this. You don't get to have an opinion anymore. You know, you don't get, this opinion doesn't get to interfere with what we're gonna do.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. I mean, a lot of the ideas that we see getting banned from social media right now may have been appropriate, 100 years ago, but in the modern times, it's like, we've already had this discussion. You lost. Get out of here.
Yeah, it's I was thinking about something earlier. Like I said, I lose my train of thought sometimes, and I probably have ADD, and it's probably undiagnosed.
I actually have ADHD myself, so I
Do you?
totally empathize with that.
Well, I said, well, we'll be talking, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's a good. I'll bring this up, and then when we get to it, I have no idea. But so yeah, you mentioned the anti-vaxxers and everything. I did have a question. Like, what are you for? You're obviously for. Are you for mandatory vaccines? Are you in favor of that?
I'm kind of iffy on the whole mandatory thing. I don't think that, I don't think the government should come to your home and like stick a needle in your arm, nothing like that. But I do think there should be a massive incentive for people to get a vaccine. So, for example, I believe that in many states, if you don't have your kids vaccinated, they cannot go to a public school. I think that is a major incentive for people to get the vaccine. Just, if you don't do this thing, there's going to be a lot of downsides to not getting it. We're not going to allow you to go to certain locations anymore. Kind of like, how a lot of areas no longer allow smoking. If you can't go into certain restaurants smoke anymore, and I think that has played an important role in disincentivizing people to smoke anymore.
Right. Well, when you have the idea of schools not allowing, you can't go to public schools, then we are getting into the area of it's not just a private business or something saying that, and it's like with the smoking, they have banned smoking in public places too, in private places too. So even if it comes like having a restaurant license. I think now, if you have a restaurant license or a bar license, you're not allowed to have smoking in these areas. But it does present. I'm often torn on this idea of at what level am I okay with the decisions being made for me, because I think there are definitely some decisions that need to be made, that need to be required. Some things shouldn't be negotiable. But then on the other hand, we raise the issue of bodily autonomy and things like that. And at what point to me, it's at what point do my rights infringing on the rights of others?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, I don't think that I have all the answers to that myself. Right. But as far as the whole general idea of liberty goes, be it bodily autonomy or just liberty in general, the foundation of my moral values comes down to two main things. I want to live in a world with less ignorance and more knowledge. I think that knowledge is power. So, naturally, I want to maximize knowledge in this world. So that's the first one. The second one being I want to live in a world with less suffering and more happiness. I don't like seeing people get hurt. I want people to live a happy, fulfilling life. So I just overall want well-being. So any policies that will further well-being, I'm in favor of. So if there's like a liberty that we can give people that'll lead to more well-being, then I'm saying, awesome, that's great. I think that, for example, the legalization of marijuana, that's great. There are a lot of medical benefits of marijuana, and overall, it's just not a very harmful drug, so awesome. But if there are certain liberties that are going to lead to a worse world, then I would say those liberties are not really worth maintaining. So, for example, I think the liberty for a corporation to burn fossil fuels and destroy the environment, that liberty doesn't really help anybody. Let's get rid of that one.
Right. It definitely is that we seem to be always looking for that perfect balance that may not even exist. The balance between how much freedom and how much well-being, like you said, and it's like I said, it's one of those things that you say it's probably never going to be found because that perfect balance probably isn't real.
I mean, I think this is ultimately just purely subjective. I don't
Right.
think there's like any I don't believe in objective morality. I think this is all just, it comes down to personal taste, and That's the big debate. I can try to convince people to see my moral point of view, but at the end of the day, not everybody's going to agree on everything. And at that point, that's why we, at least here in America, have democracy. It comes down to that vote.
Absolutely, and it's about. I do get into the I hear the moral argument and everything generally in a theistic or a argument formation for God's existence, things like that, and it amazes me because what really amazed me about it was that it was actually an argument at all, because morality seems to be a lot. It is definitely a gray and somewhat messy subject, but it seems to be a lot simpler than people give it credit for, because people tend to want to, like you said, you mentioned objective morality. People tend to want to say, well, we need to have objective morals. That way we can know what is right. And to me, morality couldn't be more tied to just the physical facts we find ourselves in than anything else.
I mean, I think that people who claim that they're objective, people who claim that their morals are objective, I think that those are also just totally subjective. I mean, you see plenty of religious people out there. Let's just take Christians, for example, will claim that, oh, I have objective morality given to me through God. Well, if you were to put, every Christian into a big building together and you were to ask them, questions about homosexuality, about abortion, you would get varying answers. Not every Christian agrees, how abortion should be handled. Should just be abortions wrong entirely? Is it okay in the terms of like a rape pregnancy? Or when it comes to, again, homosexuality, some Christians are totally fine with that. Other Christians are completely opposed to it. So even when it comes to, you all find the same religion, well, you still all disagree. And there are a lot of ideas that we have to, think about in the modern world, which the Bible can't answer. So that comes down to just really your opinion at that point.
It is tied, and it is tied to well-being too, because it's so obvious. Because we can look at it, and I could say, why is it wrong for me to punch someone in the face? Well, because it causes pain. There's no other reason. If me punching someone in the face caused no pain and caused them to get $10 million, people would want me to punch them in the face. That wouldn't be. It's just the way this universe is. The physical facts of the universe dictate what is moral and immoral. We don't get to. We do kind of decide in a way. We think we decide what's moral and immoral. To me, it seems like it's decided for us. Because once
sure I totally follow what you're saying.
Well,
yeah.
basically it's like I said, if stabbing someone didn't cause them to die, it caused them to feel. It caused them this great sense of euphoria, and something like that would be seen as a nice thing to do for someone. So the fact that if we live in a universe where things are different, morality would be different. Morality is
definitely.
To me, the morality is simply the label we put on things that we make assessments of. So morality is, in a sense, dictated to us by the physical facts of the universe we live in.
I think I somewhat agree with that, but at the end of the day, I think that we all have different ideas of what is good and bad. I think that, for example, if you look at Christianity, a lot of Christians would agree that suffering is essential to living in this world. I mean, for example, we have the story, the crucifixion of Jesus. There's a lot of suffering obviously involved there. So, they would view that as like being in a good. It was all the suffering for this greater cause. And there's the whole idea of being born with sin. So we have to live our life in a way that we can repent for being bad people.
I had a really interesting conversation with someone about the concept of original sin, and they gave me an analogy, and I'm still working on it, but I think I found a few flaws in it. Someone said basically this idea of original sin is, and how it ties to salvation, is God has written you a check, and you have the choice to cash it or not. And so that's how they get around the idea of somebody being predetermined to go to hell or predetermined to go to heaven, things like that. But yeah, it's the morality issue. Definitely, there are things we can say that, and it's funny because we get to this idea when Christians argue. They argue for an absolute morality. They tend to anyway. I won't say they all do, but they tend to argue for this idea of absolute morality. Things are either moral or immoral. There is no in between. And I tend to like to bring up the idea of lying. It's one of the commandments. So they're almost required to say, yes, that's a sin. And sin means immoral. So if it's immoral to lie, and then I've heard this brought up before. I love the analogy too. Is if Anne Frank's in your attic and the Germans knock on your door and ask you if if you're hiding any Jews in your attic or in your house, is it moral to lie, or is it immoral to lie?
Well, like I mentioned before, I strive for a world with less ignorance and more knowledge. So I think, in general, yes, I do hold to the idea that we should avoid lying, because lying just leads to more confusion in this world. But I also factor in the whole idea of reducing suffering. So in this situation, if I were to tell a Nazi at my front door, I'm hiding Jews in my attic, that's going to lead to these people dying and potentially myself getting hurt. So, is it really good in this situation to tell the truth if people will get harmed in the process? I would personally argue no. I think that we're better off just engaging in deception for more well-being in the future.
Right. It's funny because when you don't have to have that objective morality, you don't have to hold to that paradigm. You're able to then consider nuance, consider intent. And to say that I'm presented with two options, both of which I find immoral, I can easily decide which one is less immoral. So choosing the less immoral option is always going to be the more moral decision.
Mm-hmm. And I think that if you're not willing to engage with that wiggle room, with that gray area, I think that it's just going to lead to a lot of confusion on your end.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest. I see that argument posited a lot lately online too. I've seen a lot of videos about the argument for morality, and every time I watch them, I tend to get this idea of we're talking about the same thing until you inject God into it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we'll be talking about morality. This is wrong, and it's because of well-being. It's because of why it's tied to well-being. But then you bring God in, and now it's not well-being anymore. You bring God in, and it's more about how God feels about it, not about well-being. So we wind up equivocating on this idea of morality, shifting back and forth between what God wants and our well-being.
And that's part of the reason why I'm an atheist, because I think that a lot of the ideas that the Bible presents are inherently at odds with well-being. A lot of these ideas are simply not applicable with all of the knowledge we have about how human beings function and everything. By the way, I'm not sure if you want to delve into this topic or not, but how do you feel about the idea of free will, and more specifically, libertarian free will?
That remind me exactly what libertarian free will is.
Basically, it is the idea that human beings have full control over their thoughts and feelings and their decisions, and they can just control how their future goes. And if they fail in the future, that's all on them.
Yeah, I completely disagree with the idea that you can control your thoughts at all. That's first thing I noticed. I think you can influence your thoughts. I think if you focus your attention on something, but we respond to me, and the way I see it, we respond to outside stimulus all day long. We're constantly we're in our environment. We have a choice to move ourselves into a different environment, mm-hmm. and in a sense encounter different things. But to the extent that we have control over our thoughts, doesn't really make sense to me, because I can say do not think about a zebra. The first thing you thought about is a zebra. So that's why I do have a problem with the idea of certain things being sins. Also, is how can you have a thought be wrong?
Oh, you mean like lust, for example?
Right. And I've even had some pushback from some people from atheists when I get into the topic of pedophilia. People want to talk about, because people tend to talk about that when they talk about homosexuality. I'll get, for some reason, talking about homosexuality leads to pedophilia for some reason. I don't understand that.
Oh yeah, I know that. Especially conservative Christians have been, historically engaging in slippery slope arguments all the time.
Right.
They can never just engage with the topic at hand. It always has to be like, oh, well, if we do this thing, it'll lead to that thing. And that's simply not how things work. You have to demonstrate that connection. You can't just, just assume things will go in that direction.
Right. People tend to, and I think we have a lot of problems too with talking about, well, so when it does venture into that realm of pedophiles and things like that, are we talking about someone who has committed an action, or are we talking about someone who has a preference?
It's interesting that we went from this whole free will situation to the pedophilia one.
Oh yeah.
Because I know it's kind of like a weird connection here, but I'm not sure if you ever heard about the story, but I think this is a prime example of how free will. I'm personally a determinist. I don't believe that free will exists.
Hard determinist, or
I'm not really sure the distinction there exactly.
okay.
I would just say that in general, I fall somewhere in the determinism category.
Okay.
But there was a story that came out a couple of years ago, I believe, about like a totally normal guy. He had a wife. I believe he may have had some children. But at some point in his adult life, he began to feel sexually attracted to young children. He began to have pedophilic tendencies. And I think this led to him ultimately like preying on young children in his area. So eventually he had his head examined, and as it turned out, he had a brain tumor. And the minute this brain tumor was removed from his head, his thoughts of pedophilia just completely disappeared. So then, it's like, voila, he's cured. But then later on, he found, I guess sometime down the road, his pedophilic thoughts were returning. So he went to the doctor yet again, and it's like, oh, well, the tumor's coming back again. Got taken out again, and now he's normal. So I think that's a prime example of how we don't really have control over who we are as people. A lot of it is greatly influenced by, for one thing, our genetics, just nature, and it's also just, the social environment we're raised in. I think that we're just, these creatures bouncing in a world, and everything that we take in from our upbringing to our school to our friends, these all influence who we are, but we're not really in control.
To an extent, I agree. We're not. I don't think we're in complete control at all by any means. I do dismiss the libertarian free will because I don't think that's even tenable. Mm-hmm. Just because of the things you laid out, because we're not in control of where we're born, when we're born, the parents we're born to, things like that. We're not in control of any influence that we have from the beginning. And as we get later in life, we seem to be a little more in control of that, though. So as we gain more information, gain more knowledge, I think we're able to guide our decision making a little better.
Well, I wouldn't call that free will per se. I would just say that it's more information making us more complex creatures, and it makes us interact in a different way than we would before.
Right. So that's why I asked about the idea of hard determinism, meaning that there is no way for you to have done differently.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think that if you were to go back in time, it's like if you were to like replay the same event over and over and over again, assume there's like some rewind button on time, I don't think a situation could have ever played out differently. Because, that person that you rewinded back to is still the same you, with the same degree of knowledge, the same, physical environment. So it's not as if you exist in a vacuum. You're part of the world around you, and all these things are interacting, so it's going to happen the same way every time.
So do you think that makes accountability a problem?
Yes and no. It depends on really how you're defining accountability. So, for example, like let's take prisons for example. I don't think that the goal of a prison should be to punish people. Like, oh, you did a bad thing, therefore we're going to, hurt you. We're going to make you suffer because you need to learn your lesson. I think the purpose of a prison should be for two main things, because again, my morality comes down to, increasing well-being in this world. If, let's say you have a person who's a serial killer, we're not putting you in prison because, we have to, make you hurt for the things you've done. It's because, hey, you are a harmful person. You are causing damage to the society around you. We're going to lock you in this area so you can no longer cause suffering.
That's interesting because I do agree that the prisons should definitely be a place where we put people who are a danger to others. Mm-hmm. because we can't have them running around in society because then people get hurt. So knowing that people, the majority of people who even kill people, let's take go to the extreme, the majority of people who actually kill someone, we know that the majority of them would probably never kill again because crimes of passion, things like that. And I firmly believe that everyone has the ability, has it in them to kill someone if they were pushed to us. Like I said, if certain events happen and certain things happen to a person, that eventually that develops to where I don't think any of us are completely incapable of an action, given a set of given a life. Like I said, if I was to live their life, I might have done the same thing, kind of thing.
I can partially agree with that, but here's the argument that I would give. In case of like a crime of passion, it's like you were to kill your partner because they cheated on you or they just left you in general.
Right.
In a situation like that, sure, this person may not kill again, but you can never totally be sure. Maybe in the future we can do like some advanced brain scan and figure out, will this person kill again? But I think that if you were to let them go scot-free, that's kind of reinforcing the message in their mind, like, hey, this whole murder thing is pretty easy. I can get away with it again if I wanted to. So I think that you need to, have that punishment as a kind of way to disincentivize that from potentially happening in the future. And also it sends the message to the society around them, like, hey, if you engage in this behavior too, this could happen to you.
So we do have, so you agree that prisons kind of do serve a dual purpose. We do have to have some of it's for punishment. Some of it is for just removing someone from society completely, because punishing someone is punishing the serial killer is kind of a secondary issue. We don't really care if they get punished or not. We just want them gone.
Pretty much. But in a situation like I do want people to be able to be rehabilitated. And I believe there's been a lot of recent research showing that having a focus on rehabilitation in prisons rather than punishment actually leads to, more of these people, coming back out of prison and not committing crimes again. I believe that the research has shown that people who are brought into prison and they're just there to suffer, these people tend to have a lot of difficulty, readjusting to the world once they're finally released, and they're more likely to commit crimes again.
Oh, absolutely.
Whereas if you bring them in there and you're a bit easier on them and you try to give them tools to re-socialize again once they're released, they tend to fare a lot better.
Oh, I could do an entire 3 hours on prison reform and things like that. It's not to mention the fact that once they're out of prison, they now wear that scarlet letter that says, "Don't give me a job, don't give me a place to live, don't hire me for anything."
I think that there's a lot that America could learn from looking at, for example, Nordic countries. Because I've seen there's a thing called the World Happiness Report, and I believe that like the top 5 or top 10 like happiest countries, a lot of those countries are the Nordic countries. So I think that just the world in general could learn a lot about how they handle the prison system in their economy as well, and just try to adopt that. And I think that would lead to more well-being universally.
All right, we do have, I think we do have this idea in this country. Most people don't come into contact with law enforcement or with most of certain demographics, I would say, don't come into contact with law enforcement, don't tend to not have any interaction with the justice system other than what they see on TV. And they tend to think that people are in jail for a reason. People are in prison for a reason. And if they're in prison, it must be a really good reason, because once again, we tend to have this blind trust that this wouldn't be going on unless there was a good reason for it. We just kind of trust that idea that surely, as in 2020, we're not putting people in jail for no reason, but we actually are.
That's kind of the funny thing about it is that, I mean, like we're constantly moving forward. I think that people tend to think like, hey, we currently exist in the present, like this, like the greatest time ever, this is like the end of the line. We're as good as we possibly can. But I mean, like people could have had that exact same mentality, 100 years ago. Like we're at the pinnacle of society.
Right.
But it's like this doesn't have to be the end. We can always find more and more ways to improve. And it is possible that things can actually get worse again. I mean, I think that in many ways the world is getting better, but they can get worse. I mean, before Adolf Hitler took over Germany, there were a lot of socially liberal ideas that were popular in Germany, but once he took over, a lot of those ideas were abolished. So, yeah, we always have to make sure that things keep going in a positive direction; they don't fall backwards again.
That got me thinking about. So when I watched it was one of Ben Shapiro's videos a while back. The more I watch of him, the more I get this sense of he and people like him. They seem to have this longing for this perfect time, and they seem to think that's already happened. Because any progressive idea tends to be met with backlash.
They're called conservatives for a reason.
Right. I mean, it was. I'm pretty sure it was about marriage equality, the one I watched, and it was this idea of obviously they're making the same garbage arguments, but this idea that things are great the way they are is baffling to me because, like you said, there's always things we can do better, and I don't understand this appeal to wanting to keep things a certain way.
Yeah, personally, I don't care about tradition for the sake of tradition. I mean, if there is a tradition that we have in this world that is, causing more well-being, then I'd say awesome. Let's maintain a tradition. I mean, you could make the argument that washing your hands is a kind of tradition. Not every country practices that, but here in America, after a meal, after going to the store, you go back home and you wash your hands. That is a good tradition to maintain. But there are traditions in this world that we should probably get rid of.
Oh, absolutely. It's like I said, it really has always kind of confused me. Even when I probably would have identified as a conservative, I remember thinking like, why is it we think that somehow everything's great the way it is? And so when someone comes along and says, hey, and clearly point out that this group of people are not getting the same rights as this other group of people. Why is that better than the way it could be?
I think I think it may just come down to these people are deeply threatened by new ideas coming forward because they're currently comfortable with the way things are and they're concerned that if things were to change, they may actually make the world worse. So it is important if you're going to reach these people to demonstrate, hey, I know these ideas are new and they seem a bit scary right now, but here's all the information that I have, here's all the research on this topic. If we do this thing, it's going to make the world better. It's not going to make the world worse. So just like put your trust into the research and let us go forward with it and give it a shot.
I I do agree with that. That's a great perspective, honestly. And I was talking with someone about universal health care. We're the only, country that's, we're in our status, the only country that doesn't have it at this point, the only modern country. I'm looking for the word, but we're still we're behind all these other countries that have done this a long time ago. And I get the sense that people who are against the idea of universal health care, and I don't want my tax dollars paying for this person, same thing with other entitlements, food stamps, welfare, things like that. I don't want to be paying for someone else's problems. I get the sense that they identify themselves by the disparate by the amount of distance socially or economically between them and others. And this is where they derive some of their identity from. That I can view myself as successful, or I can view myself as doing better than these people. And if that gap closes, they don't view that as them coming up. They view that as themselves going down.
I have heard that analogy a couple of times before. It's kind of like, for a long time, when we see women and black people, being granted more rights, people don't interpret this as them just like, catching up with them. They view that as like them being pulled back. And Yeah, I'm not really sure what the proper way of destroying that illusion of them being brought down is, but it is certainly an issue that we need to tackle, because not tackling it can lead to just a greater amount of bigotry in this country.
It is. I don't know. I don't know how you combat that. And of course, there's no push button answer. There's no quick fix for it. But obviously, I've had the discussion before where it's like, yeah, my house may never burn down, but I want my tax dollars to go to the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I might not, most likely my house will never catch on fire. But I've never thought about, I'm sick of my tax dollars, going for all these people that aren't safe with electrical equipment or something like that. I'm sick of my tax dollars going to people who don't know how to, not put the towel on the stove.
It's funny you actually mentioned this, because there were a couple of headlines that came out a couple of years ago about certain towns don't have any like public fire department. They only have like private fire departments. And in one situation, a home caught on fire, but the family didn't have the money to pay for the private firefighting organization, so the firemen just let their home burn to the ground.
Wow.
And I would say that it's not really a world that I'd like to live in, where the firefighters put their profits over the safety and well-being of people's lives.
That's an incredible story. Honestly, I can't believe that actually happened in the United States. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I hear this argument a lot. It's like, why should I have to pay for this person's health care, this thing? And it's like, because it leads to more well-being. Because we can look at countries that do implement the same thing, and these people live happier lives. I mean, why is there something about a greater amount of happiness in the world that's threatening to you? I'm not totally sure, but people just seem to have this mentality, if it's being taxed from them, if it's being taken away from them, somehow that's harming them. But I'm pretty sure in America, under our current private health care, in the long run, you actually lose more money than you gain money under this private system than under a taxed public system.
Oh, sure, because healthy people tend to be, obviously, by definition, more productive than unhealthy people.
Exactly, yeah.
So, I mean, guess what that means? More tax dollars. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's it is a. I do think a lot of it comes down to, because you can show them the data, you can show them that, hey, this will, but I think we're so contingent on these, or so tied to this sense of immediate results.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't like to wait for things. We don't like to, if we want to change something, we want it changed right now, or there's no point in doing it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And we owe, I think we forget that we owe a lot of the world we live in now, the country we live in now, to people that were willing to sacrifice at one point and not get the benefit of the change right away, but go ahead and make the change anyway.
I think one of the major issues in this country that's also holding us back is the other religion that we have, which is still pretty popular, and that one is called nationalism. I think that nationalism operates in a very similar fashion to actual theistic religions, because it's like you're worshiping this idealized fictitious concept of this this perfect country, the founding fathers, the U.S. flag. And then whenever you present ideas and say, hey, these founding fathers had a lot of cool concepts, but at the end of the day, they were human beings, and we can improve upon what they came up with and try to make the world a better place. But people think, no, America's already great the way it is. We can't improve it. But it's like, but look at other countries. They're doing things a lot better. People are happier over here. But they just think, oh, well, they're the outsiders, they're the foreigners. I want to be America. But it's like, if America in our current way is going to lead to more suffering, is this the great thing we can do?
Right. It's this idea that sometimes it's not great to be different. Sometimes it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes being different isn't the way to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're about an hour and a half in. I mean, I can't thank you enough for being here. Honestly, when you messaged me and said you were willing to come on my channel, I'm just starting out. I couldn't be more grateful to you.
Oh yeah, no problem at all. I mean, I think this was a pretty insightful conversation. I had a lot of fun discussing all of these wide array of topics. So yeah, I had a good time.
Thank you so much. And if anybody's watching or watches this in the future, if you're one of the few people that haven't subscribed to Nate, go subscribe to his channel. His links are in the description. Go support him on Patreon because YouTube doesn't pay the bills. YouTube keeps the money for themselves. So
That's the thing, yeah, is that a lot of my content, because of the topics I choose to cover, and YouTube has just gotten more strict over the years when it comes to, what words you can use in a video and your title. So a lot of videos that I had that were, fully monetized like 5 years ago, not making much off them anymore. So Patreon is like a massive source of income for me right now in terms of YouTube stuff.
absolutely, I encourage anyone if you want to support someone on Patreon, Nate's a perfect candidate. Great content. And again, thank you so much for being here, Nate. I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right, buddy. I appreciate it, guys. We'll see y'all next time. And have a good weekend. Thank y'all for coming.